Gulliver collapsed. His whole body was convulsing. I placed the radio down on the unit. The kitchen had its own radio. I switched that on, too. The TV was still on in the other room as I had intended it to be. A cacophony of classical music and newsreaders and rock music filled the air as I reached Jonathan and pulled his arm so he now had no contact with Gulliver. He turned, held me by the throat, pressing me back against the refrigerator. "You have made a mistake," he said. Gulliver's convulsion stopped and he looked around, confused. He saw two men, both identical, like his father, pressing into each other's necks with equivalent force. I knew that whatever else happened, I had to keep Jonathan in the kitchen. If he stayed in the kitchen with the radios on and the TV in the next room, we would be equally matched. "Gulliver," I said. "Gulliver, give me the knife." "Any knife." "That knife, give me that knife, Dad?" "Are you my dad?" "Yes, I am." "Now give me the knife." "Ignore him, Gulliver." Jonathan said, "He's not your father." "I am." "He's an imposter. He's not what he looks like. He's a monster. An alien. We have to destroy him." As we carried on, locked in our mutually futile, combative pose, matching strength with strength, I saw Gulliver's eyes fill with doubt. He looked at me. "It was time for the truth. I'm not your father, and neither is he." "Your dad is dead, Gulliver. He died on Saturday, the 17th of April. He was taken by I thought of a way of putting it that he would understand. "By the people we work for. They extracted information from him and then they killed him, and they sent me here as him to kill you and kill your mother and anyone who knew about what he had achieved that day. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it because I started to feel something that was meant to be impossible. I empathized with you, grew to like you, worry about you, love you both, and I gave everything up. I have no power, no strength." "Don't listen to him, son," Jonathan said, and then he realized something. "Turn off the radios. Listen to me. Turn off the radios now." I stared at Gulliver with pleading eyes. "Whatever you do, don't turn them off. The signal interferes with the technology." "It's his left hand." "His left hand. Everything is in his left hand." Gulliver was clambering upright. He looked numb. His face was unreadable. I thought hard. "The leaf," I yelled. "Gulliver, you were right. The leaf. Remember the leaf?" And think of, it was then that the other version of myself smashed his head into my nose with swift and brutal force. My head rebounded against the fridge door and everything dissolved. Colors faded, and the noise of the radios and the faraway newsreader swam into each other, a swirling audio soup. It was over, Gulliver? The other me switched one of the radios off. Debussy disappeared. But at the moment the music went away, I heard a scream. It sounded like Gulliver. And it was. But it wasn't a scream of pain. It was a scream of determination, a primal roar of rage, giving him the courage he needed to stab the knife that had been about to cut his own wrists, into the back of a man who looked every inch his own father. And the knife went deep, with that roar and that sight. The room sharpened to focus. I could get to my feet before Jonathan's finger reached the second radio. I yanked him back by the hair. I saw his face. The pain, clearly articulated in the way only human faces can manage. The eyes shocked, yet pleading, the mouth seeming to melt away. Melt away. Melt away. Melt away. The ultimate crime. I would not look at his face again. He could not die while that technology remained inside him. I dragged him over to the argue. "Lift it up, I ordered Gulliver. Lift up the cover. Cover? The hot plate. He did it. He lifted the circular steel ring up and let it fall back. And he did so without a single question in his eyes. Help me, I said. He's fighting. Help me with his arm. Together, we had enough force to press his palm down to the burning metal. The scream, as we kept him there, was horrendous. Knowing what it was I was doing, it truly sounded like the end of the universe. I was committing the ultimate crime. I was destroying gifts and killing one of my own kind. We've got to keep it there. I shouted to Gulliver, we've got to keep it there. Hold, and then I switched my attention to Jonathan. Tell them it is over. I whispered. Tell them you have completed your mission. Tell them there has been a problem with the gifts and that you will not be able to return. Tell them and I will stop the pain, a lie. And a gamble that they were tuned to him and not to me. But a necessary one. He told them. Yet his pain continued. How long were we like this? Seconds? Minutes. It was like Einstein's conundrum. The hot stove versus the pretty girl. Towards the end of it, Jonathan was on his knees, losing consciousness. Tears streamed down my face as I finally pulled that sticky mess of a hand away. I checked his pulse. He was gone. The knife pierced through his chest as he fell back. I looked at the hand and this face, and it was clear, he was disconnected not just from the hosts, but from life. The reason it was clear was that he was becoming himself the cellular reconfiguration that automatically followed death. The whole shape of him was changing, curling in his face. He was not able to get, flattening. His skull lengthening. His skin mottled shades of purple and violet. Only, the knife in his back stayed. It was strange. Within the context of that earth kitchen, this creature, structured precisely as I had been, seemed entirely alien to me. A monster? A beast? Something other? Gulliver stared but said nothing. The shock was so profound, it was a challenge to breathe, let alone speak. I did not want to speak either, but for more practical reasons. Indeed, I worried that I may already have said too much. Maybe the hosts had heard everything I had said in that kitchen. I didn't know. What I did know was that I had one more thing to do. They took your powers away, but they didn't take theirs. But before I could do anything, a car pulled up outside. Isabel was home. Gulliver, it's your mother. Keep her away. Warn her. He left the room. I turned back to the heat of that hot plate and positioned my hand next to where his had been, where pieces of his flesh still fizzed. And I pressed down and felt a pure and total pain which took away space and time and guilt. The nature of reality. Civilized life, you know, is based on a huge number of illusions in which we all collaborate willingly. The trouble is, we forget after a while that they are illusions, and we are deeply shocked when reality is torn down around us. J.G. Ballard. What was reality? An objective truth, a collective illusion, a majority opinion. The product of historical understanding, a dream. A dream? Well, yes, maybe. But if this had been a dream, that it was one from which I hadn't yet woken. But once humans really study things in depth, whether in the artificially divided fields of quantum physics or biology, or neuroscience or mathematics or love, they come closer and closer to nonsense, irrationality, and anarchy. Everything they know is disproved over and over again. The earth is not flat, leeches have no medicinal value. There is no God. Progress is a myth. The present is all they have. And this doesn't just happen on the big scale. It happens to each individual human, too. In every life there is a moment, a crisis, one that says, what I believe is wrong. It happens to everyone. The only difference is how that knowledge changes them. In most cases, it is simply a case of burying that knowledge and pretending it isn't there. That is how humans grow old. That is ultimately what creases their faces and curves their backs and shrinks their mouths and ambitions. The weight of that denial. The stress of it. This is not unique to humans. The single biggest act of bravery or madness anyone can do is the act of change. I was something and now I am something else. I was a monster and now I am a different type of monster. One that will die and feel pain, but one that will also live and maybe even find happiness one day. Because happiness is possible for me now. It exists on the other side of the hurt, a face as shocked as the moon. As for Gulliver, he was young and could accept things better than his mother. His life had never really made sense to him, so the final proof of its nonsensical nature was a kind of relief to him. He was someone who had lost a father, and also someone who had killed. But the thing he had killed was something he didn't understand, and couldn't relate to. He could have cried for a dead dog. But a dead Vonadorian meant nothing to him. On the subject of grief, it was true that Gulliver was worried about his father and wanted to know that he hadn't felt any pain. I told him he hadn't. Was that true? I didn't know. That was part of being human, I discovered. It was about knowing which lies to tell and when to tell them. To love someone is to lie to them. But I never saw him cry for his dad. I didn't know why. Maybe it was hard to feel the loss of someone who had never really been there. Anyway, after dark, he helped drag the body outside. Newton was awake now. He had woken after Jonathan's technology had melted away. And now he accepted what he was seeing as dogs seem to accept everything. There were no canine historians, so that made things easier. Nothing was unexpected. At one point he began digging in the ground as if trying to help us. But that wasn't required. No grave needed to be dug as the monster. And that was how I referred to it in my mind. The monster would in its natural state decomposed rapidly in this oxygen-rich atmosphere. It was quite a struggle dragging him out there, especially given my burnt hand and the fact that Gulliver had to stop to be sick at one point. He looked dreadful. I remember watching him staring at me from beneath his fringe. His face as shocked as the moon. Newton wasn't our only observer. Isabel watched us in disbelief. I hadn't wanted her to come outside and see, but she did so. At that point she didn't know everything. She didn't know, for instance, that her husband was dead, or that the corpse I was dragging looked essentially how I had once looked. She learned these things slowly, but not slowly enough. She would have needed at least a couple of centuries to absorb these facts, maybe even more. It was like taking someone from Regency England to 21st century downtown Tokyo. She simply could not come to terms with it. After all, she was a historian, someone whose job was to find patterns, continuities, and causes, and to transform the past into a narrative that walked the same curving path. But on this path, someone had now thrown something down from the sky that had landed so hard it had broken the ground, tilted the earth, made the route impossible to navigate. Which is to say, she went to the doctor and asked for some tablets. The pills she was given didn't help and she ended up staying in bed for 3 weeks through exhaustion. It was suggested that she might have an illness, called me. She didn't, of course. She was suffering from grief, a grief for not just the loss of her husband, but also the loss of familiar reality. She hated me during that time. I had explained everything to her. that none of this had been my decision, that I had been sent here reluctantly with no task except to halt human progress and to act for the greater good of the entire cosmos. But she couldn't look at me because she didn't know what she was looking at. I'd lied to her, I'd slept with her, I'd let her tend my wounds, but she hadn't known who she'd been sleeping with. It didn't matter that I'd fallen in love with her, and that it was that act of total defiance that had saved her life and Gulliver's. No, that didn't matter at all. I was a killer and to her, an alien. My hand slowly healed. I went to the hospital and they gave me a transparent plastic glove to wear filled with an antiseptic cream. At the hospital they asked me how it had happened, and I told them I'd been drunk and leaned on the hot plate without thinking and without feeling the pain until it was too late. The burns became blisters and the nurse burst them, and I watched with interest as clear liquid oozed out. Selfishly, I'd hoped at some point that my injured hand might trigger some sympathy from Isabel. I wanted to see those eyes again, eyes that had gazed warriously at my face after Gulliver had attacked me in his sleep. I briefly toyed with the idea that I should try and convince her that nothing I had told her was true, that we were more magic realism than science fiction, specifically that branch of literary fiction that comes complete with an unreliable narrator, that I wasn't really an alien, that I was a human who had had a breakdown, and there was nothing extraterrestrial or extramarital about me. Gulliver might have known what he had seen, but Gulliver had a fragile mind. I could easily have denied everything. A dog's health fluctuates, people fall off roofs and survive. After all, humans, especially adult ones, want to believe the most mundane truths possible. They need to, in order to stop their worldviews and their sanity from capsizing and plunging them into the vast ocean of the incomprehensible. But it seemed too disrespectful somehow, and I couldn't do it. Lies were everywhere on this planet, but true love had its name for a reason, and if an orator tells you it was all just a dream, you want to tell him he has simply passed from one delusion into another one. And he could wake from this new reality at any time. You had to stay consistent to life's delusions. All you had was your perspective, so objective truth was meaningless. You had to choose a dream and stick with it. Everything else was a con. And once you had tasted truth and love in this same potent cocktail, there had to be no more tricks. But while I knew I couldn't correct this version of things with any integrity, living with it was hard. You see, before coming to Earth I had never wanted or needed to be cared for, but I hung it now to have that feeling of being looked after, of belonging, of being loved. Maybe I was expecting too much. Maybe it was more than I deserved to be allowed to stay in the same house. Even if I had to sleep on that hideous purple sofa, the only reason this was granted I imagined was Gulliver. Gulliver wanted me to stay. I had saved his life. I had helped him stand up to bullies, but his forgiveness still came as a surprise. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't cinema paradiso, but he seemed to accept me as an extraterrestrial life form far more easily than he had accepted me as a father. "Where are you from?" he asked me one Saturday morning, at 7:05, before his mother was awake. Far, 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 far away. How far is far? It's very hard to explain, I said. I mean, you think France is far away. Just try, he said. I noticed the fruit bowl. Maybe the day before I had been to the supermarket buying healthy food the doctor had recommended, for Isabel. Bananas, oranges, grapes, a grapefruit. Okay, I said, grabbing the large grapefruit. This is the sun. I placed the grapefruit on the coffee table. I then looked for the smallest grape I could find. I placed it at the other end of the table. That is Earth, so small you can hardly see it. Banana stepped closer to the table, clearly attempting to annihilate Earth in his jaws. No, Newton, I said, let me finish. Newton retreated, tail between his legs. Gulliver was frowning as he studied the grapefruit and the fragile little grape. He looked around. So where is your planet? I think he honestly expected me to place the orange I was holding somewhere else in the room, by the television or on one of the bookshelves. Or maybe at a pinch upstairs. To be accurate, this orange should be placed on a coffee table in New Zealand. He was silent for a moment, trying to understand the level of farness I was talking about. Still in a trance, he asked, "Can I go there?" "No. It's impossible." "Why? There must have been a spaceship." I shook my head. "No, I didn't travel. I may have arrived, but I didn't travel." He was confused, so I explained, but then he was even more confused. "Anyway, the point is there is no more chance of me crossing the universe now than any other human. This is who I am now, and this is where I have to stay." "You gave up the universe for a life on this sofa." I didn't realize that at the time. Isabel came downstairs. She was wearing her white dressing gown and her pajamas. She was pale, but she was always pale in the morning. She looked at me and Gulliver talking, and for a moment she seemed to greet the scene with a rarely seen fondness. But the expression faded as she remembered everything. "What's going on?" she asked. "Nothing to." "Gulliver, what is the fruit doing?" she asked, traces of sleep still evident in her quiet voice. I was explaining to Gulliver where I came from. "How far away?" "You came from a grapefruit." "No. The grapefruit is the sun, your sun, our sun. I lived on the orange, which should be in New Zealand. Earth is now in Newton's stomach." I smiled at her. I thought she might find this funny, but she just stared at me the way she'd been staring at me for weeks, as if I were light years away from her. She left the room. "Gulliver," I said, "I think it would be best if I left. I shouldn't have stayed, really. You see, this isn't just about all this stuff. You know that argument me and your mother had, the one you never found out about." "Yeah, well, I was unfaithful. I had sex with a woman called Maggie, one of your father's students. I didn't enjoy it, but that was beside the point. I didn't realize it would hurt your mother, but it did. I didn't know the exact rules of fidelity, but that isn't really an excuse, or not one, I can use, when I was deliberately lying about so many other things, when I was endangering her life and yours. On my side, I think I'm going to leave." "Why?" That question tugged at me. It reached into my stomach and pulled. "I just think it will be for the best right now." "Where are you going to go?" "I don't know, not yet, but don't worry, I'll tell you when I get there." His mother was back in the doorway. "I'm going to leave," I told her. She closed her eyes. She inhaled. "Yes," she said, with the mouth I had once kissed. "Yes. Maybe it is for the best." Her whole face crumpled as if her skin were the emotions she wanted to screw up and throw away. My eyes felt a warm, gentle strain, my vision blurred, then something ran down my cheek all the way to my lips, a liquid. Like rain, but warmer, a saline. I had shed a tear, the second type of gravity. Before I left, I went upstairs, to the attic. It was dark in there except for the glow of the computer. Gulliver was lying on his bed staring out of the window. "I'm not your dad, Gulliver. I don't have a right to be here." "No, I know." Gulliver chewed on his wristband. Hostility glistened in his eyes like broken glass. "You're not my dad. But you're just like him. You don't give a shit. And you shagged some of mine mum's back. He did that too, you know." "Listen, Gulliver, I'm not trying to leave you. I'm trying to bring back your mother, okay? She's a bit lost right now, and my presence here isn't helping. It's just so fucked up. I feel totally alone." Sun suddenly shone through the window, oblivious to our mood. "Loneliness, Gulliver, is a fact, as universal as hydrogen." He sighed a sigh that should really have belonged to an older human. "I just don't feel cut out sometimes. You know, cut out for life. I mean, people at school, loads of their parents are divorced, but they seem to have an okay relationship with their dads. And everyone's always thought with me, what excuse did I have to go off the rails? What was wrong with my life? Living in a nice house with rich, non-divorced parents, what the fuck could possibly be wrong there?" But it was all bullshit. Mom and Dad never loved each other. Not since I can remember anyway. Mom seemed to change after he had his breakdown. I mean, after you came. But that was just her delusion. I mean, you weren't even who she thought you were. It's come to something, when you relate to E.T. more than your own dad. He was crap. Seriously, I can't think of one piece of advice he gave me. Except I shouldn't become an architect because architecture takes 100 years to be appreciated. Listen, you don't need guidance, Gulliver, everything you need is inside your own head. You have more knowledge about the universe than anyone on your own planet. I pointed at the window. You've seen what's out there, and also, I should say, you've shown yourself to be really strong. He stared out of the window, again. What's it like up there? Very different. Everything is different. But how? Well, just existing is different. No one dies. There's no pain. Everything is beautiful. The only religion is mathematics. There are no families. There are the hosts. They give instructions, and there is everyone else. The advancement of mathematics and the security of the universe are the two concerns. There is no hatred. There are no fathers and sons. There is no clear line between biology and technology. And everything is violent. It sounds awesome, it's dull. It's the dullest life you can imagine. Here you have pain and loss. That's the price. But the rewards can be wonderful, Gulliver. He looked at me, disbelieving, yeah. Well, I don't have a clue how to find them. The phone rang. Isabel answered. Moments later she was calling up to the attic. Gulliver, it's for you. A girl. Nat. I couldn't help but notice the faintest of faint smiles on Gulliver's face. A smile he felt embarrassed about and tried to hide under clouds of discontent as he left the room. I sat and breathed with lungs that would one day stop functioning but which still had a lot of warm clear air to inhale. Then I turned to Gulliver's primitive Earth computer and began to type, giving as much advice as I could think of to help a human. Advice for a human. 1. Shame is a shackle. Free yourself. 2. Don't worry about your abilities. You have the ability to love. That is enough. 3. Be nice to other people. At the universal level, they are you. 4. Technology won't save humankind. Humans will. 5. Laugh. It suits you. 6. Be curious. Question everything. A present fact is just a future fiction. 7. Irony is fine, but not as fine as feeling. 8. Peanut butter sandwiches go perfectly well with a glass of white wine. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. 9. Sometimes, to be yourself, you will have to forget yourself and become something else. Your character is not a fixed thing. You will sometimes have to move to keep up with it. 10. History is a branch of mathematics. So is literature. Economics is a branch of religion. 11. Sex can damage love, but love can't damage sex. 12. The news should start with mathematics, then poetry, and move down from there. 13. You shouldn't have been born. Your existence is as close to impossible as can be. To dismiss the impossible is to dismiss yourself. 14. Your life will have 25,000 days in it. Make sure you remember some of them. 15. The road to snobbery is the road to misery and vice versa. 16. Tragedy is just comedy that hasn't come to fruition. One day we will laugh at this, we will laugh at everything. 17. Wear clothes, by all means, but remember they are clothes. 18. One life form's gold is another life form's tin can. 19. Read poetry. Especially poetry, by Emily Dickinson. It might save you. And Sexton knows the mind, Walt Whitman knows grass, but Emily Dickinson knows everything. 20. If you become an architect, remember this. The square is nice. So is the rectangle, but you can overdo it. 21. Don't bother going into space until you can leave the solar system. Then go to Zabi. 22. Don't worry about being angry. 21. Worry when being angry becomes impossible, because then you have been consumed. 23. 21. Happiness is not out here. It is in there. 24. New technology on Earth just means something you will laugh at in 5 years. Value the stuff you won't laugh at in 5 years, like love, or a good poem, or a song, or the sky. 25. There is only one genre in fiction. The genre is called book. 26. Never be too far away from a radio. A radio can save your life. 27. Dogs are geniuses of loyalty, and that is a good kind of genius to have. 28. Your mother should write a novel. In Carasier. 29. If there is a sunset, stop and look at it. Knowledge is finite, wonder is infinite. 30. Don't aim for perfection. Evolution and life only happen through mistakes. 31. Failure is a trick of the light. 32. You are human. You will care about money, but realize it can't make you happy because happiness is not for sale. 33. You are not the most intelligent creature in the universe. You are not even the most intelligent creature on your planet. The tonal language in the Song of a Humpback Whale displays more complexity than the entire works of Shakespeare. It is not a competition. Well, it is. But don't worry about it. 34. David Bowie's Space Oddity tells you nothing about space, but its musical patterns are very pleasing to the ears. 35. When you look up at the sky on a clear night and see thousands of stars and planets, realize that very little is happening on most of them. The important stuff is further away. 36. One day humans will live on Mars, but nothing there will be more exciting than a single, overcast morning on Earth. 37. Don't always try to be cool. The whole universe is cool. It's the warm bits that matter. 38. Walt Whitman was right about at least one thing. You will contradict yourself. You are large. You contain multitudes. 39. No one is ever completely right about anything. Anywhere. 40. Everyone is a comedy. If people are laughing at you, they just don't quite understand a joke, that is themselves. 41. Your brain is open. Never let it be closed. 42. In 1,000 years, if humans survive that long, everything you know will have been disproved and replaced by even bigger myths. 43. Everything matters. 44. You have the power to stop time. You do it by kissing or listening to music. Music, by the way, is how you see things you can't otherwise see. It is the most advanced thing you have. It is a superpower. Keep up with the bass guitar. You are good at it, join a band. 45. My friend, Ari, was one of the wisest humans who ever lived. Read him. 46. A paradox. The things you don't need to live, books, art, cinema, wine, and so on, are the things you need to live. 47. A cow is a cow even if you call it beef. 48. No two moralities match. Accept different shapes, so long as they aren't sharp enough to hurt. 49. Don't be scared of anyone. You killed an alien assassin sent from the other side of the universe with a bread knife. Also, you have a very hard punch. 50. At some point bad things are going to happen. Have someone to hold on to. 51. Alcohol in the evening is very enjoyable. Hangovers in the morning are very unpleasant. At some point, you have to choose evenings or mornings. 52. If you are laughing, check that you don't really want to cry. And vice versa. 53. Don't ever be afraid of telling someone you love them. There are things wrong with your world, but an excess of love is not one. 54. That girl you are on the phone to. There will be others. But I hope she's nice. 55. You are not any species on Earth with technology. Look at ants. Really, look. What they do with twigs and leaves is quite amazing. 56. Your mother loved your father, even if she pretends she didn't. 57. There are a lot of idiots in your species. Lots and lots. You are not one of them. Hold your ground. 58. It is not the length of life that matters. It's the length of life that matters. But while borrowing, keep the sun above you. 59. Numbers are pretty. Prime numbers are beautiful. Understand that. 60. Obey your head. Obey your heart, obey your gut. In fact, obey everything except commands. 61. One day, if you get into a position of power, tell people this. Just because you can, it doesn't mean you should. There is a power and a beauty in unproved conjectures, unkissed lips, and unpicked flowers. 62. Start fires, but only metaphorically. Unless you're cold and it's a safe setting, in which case, start fires. 63. It's not the technique. It's the method. It's not the words. It's the melody. 64. Be alive. That is your supreme duty to the world. 65. Don't think you know. No, you think. 66. As a black hole forms, it creates an immense gamma ray burst, blinding whole galaxies with light and destroying millions of worlds. You could disappear at any second. This one. Or this one. Or this one. Make sure, as often as possible, you were doing something you'd be happy to die doing. 67. War is the answer to the wrong question. 68. Physical attraction is primarily glandular. 69. Ari believed we are all a simulation, matter is an illusion. Everything is silicon. He could be right. But your emotions, they're solid. 70. It's not you. It's them. No, really, it is. 71. Walk Newton whenever you can. He likes to get out of the house. And he is a lovely dog. 72. Most humans don't think about things very much. They survive by thinking about needs and wants alone. But you are not one of them. Be careful. 73. No one will understand you. It is not ultimately that important. What is important is that you understand you. 74. A cork is not the smallest thing. The wish on your deathbed to have worked harder. That is the smallest thing, because it won't be there. 75. Politeness is often fear. Kindness is always courage. But caring is what makes you human. Care more, become more human. 76. In your mind, change the name of every day to Saturday, and change the name of work to play. 77. When you watch the news and see members of your species in turmoil, do not think there is nothing you can do. But no, it is not done by watching news. 78. You get up. You put on your clothes. And then you put on your personality. Choose wisely. 79. Leonardo da Vinci was not one of you. He was one of us. 80. Language is euphemism. Love is truth. 81. You can't find happiness looking for the meaning of life. Meaning is only the third most important thing. It comes after loving and being. 82. If you think something is ugly, look harder. Ugliness is just a failure of seeing. 83. A watched pot never boils. That is all you need to know about quantum physics. 84. You are more than the sum of your particles. And that is quite a sum. 85. The Dark Ages never ended, but don't tell your mother. 86. To like something is to insult it, love it, or hate it. Be passionate. As civilization advances, so does indifference. It is a disease. Immunize yourself with art and love. 87. Dark matter is needed to hold galaxies together. Your mind is a galaxy. More dark than light. But the light makes it worthwhile. 88. Which is to say, don't kill yourself. Even when the darkness is total, always know that life is not still. Time is space. You are moving through that galaxy. Wait for the stars. 89. At the subatomic level, everything is complex. But you do not live at the subatomic level. You have the right to simplify. If you don't, you will go insane. 90. But know this. Men are not from Mars. Women are not from Venus. Do not fall for categories. Everyone is everything. Every ingredient inside a star is inside you, and every personality that ever existed competes in the theater of your mind for the main role. 91. You are lucky to be alive. Inhale and take in life's wonders. Never take so much as a single petal of a single flower for granted. 92. If you have children and love one more than another, work at it. They will know, even if it is by a single atom less. You are a good human. Gulliver Martin. 97. I love you, remember that. 95. A very brief hug. 95. I packed a bag full of Andrew Martin's clothes, and then I left. 95. Where are you going to go? Asked Isabel. 95. I don't know. I'll find somewhere. Don't worry. 95. She looked like she was going to worry. We hugged. I longed to hear her hum the theme to Cinema Paradiso. 95. I longed to hear her talk to me about Alfred the Great. I longed for her to make me a sandwich, or pour TCP on a swab of cotton wool. I longed to hear her share her worries about work, or Gulliver, but she wouldn't, she couldn't. 95. The hug ended. 95. Newton, by her side, looked up at me with the most full-on eyes. 95. Goodbye, I said. 95. And I walked across the gravel, towards the road, and somewhere in the universe of my soul a fiery, life-giving star collapsed, and a very black hole began to form. The melancholy beauty of the setting sun. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is just to stay human. Michael Franti. The thing with black holes, of course, is that they are really very neat and tidy. There is no mess inside a black hole, all the disordered stuff that goes through the event horizon. All that in falling matter and radiation is compressed to the smallest state it can possibly be, a state that might easily be called nothing at all. Black holes, in other words, give clarity. You lose the warmth and fire of the star, but you gain order and peace. Total focus, that is to say, I knew what to do. I would stay as Andrew Martin. This was what Isabel wanted. You see, she wanted the least fuss possible. She didn't want a scandal or a missing persons inquiry or a funeral, so doing what I thought was best, I moved out, rented a small flat in Cambridge for a while, and then I applied for jobs elsewhere in the world. Eventually I got a teaching job in America at Stanford University in California. Once there I did as well as I needed to do while making sure I didn't do anything to advance any mathematical understanding that would lead to a leap in technological progress. Indeed, I had a poster on my office wall with a photograph of Albert Einstein on it and one of his famous statements, "Technological progress is like an axe in the hands of a pathological animal." I never mentioned anything about a proof of the Riemann hypothesis, except to persuade my peers of its inherent impossibility. My main motive for doing so was to make sure no Vonadorian ever had need to visit Earth, but also, Einstein was right, humans weren't good at handling progress, and I didn't want to see more destruction than necessary inflicted on or by this planet. I lived on my own. I had a nice apartment in Palo Alto that I filled with plants. I got drunk, got high, got lower than low. I painted some art, ate peanut butter breakfasts, and once went to an art house cinema to watch 3 films by Fellini in a row. I caught a cold, got tinnitus, and consumed a poisoned prawn. I bought myself a globe, and I would often sit there spinning it. I felt blue with sadness, red with rage and green with envy. I felt the entire human rainbow. I walked a dog for an elderly lady in the apartment above me, but the dog was never quite Newton. I talked over warm champagne at stifling academic functions. I shouted in forests just to hear the echo, and every night I would go back and reread Emily Dickinson. I was lonely, but at the same time I appreciated other humans a bit more than they appreciated themselves. After all, I knew you could journey for light years and not come across a single one. On occasion I would weep just looking at them, sitting in one of the vast libraries on campus. Sometimes I would wake up at 3 in the morning and find myself crying for no specific reason. At other times I would sit on my beanbag and stare into space, watching motes of dust suspended in sunlight. I tried not to make any friends. I knew that as friendships progressed questions would get more intrusive, and I didn't want to lie to people. People would ask about my past, where I was from, my childhood. Sometimes a student or a fellow lecturer would look at my hand at the scarred and purple skin, but they would never pry. It was a happy place, Stanford University. All the students wore smiles and red sweaters and looked very tanned and healthy for life, forms who spent their entire days in front of computer screens. I would walk like a ghost through the bustle of the quad, breathing that warm air, trying not to be terrified by the scale of human ambition surrounding me. I got drunk a lot on white wine, which made me a rarity. No one seemed to have hangovers at this place, so I didn't like frozen yogurt, a big problem as everyone at Stanford lived on frozen yogurt. I bought myself music, Debussy, Ennio Morricone, The Beach Boys, Al Green. I watched Cinema Paradiso. There was a Talking Heads song called This Must Be the Place, which I played over and over again, even though doing so made me feel melancholy and crave to hear her voice again, or to hear Gulliver's footsteps on the stairs. I read a lot of poetry, too, though that often had a similar effect. One day I was in the campus bookstore and saw a copy of The Dark Ages by Isabel Martin. I stood there for what must have been the best part of half an hour reading her words, aloud. Freshly ravaged by the Vikings, I'd say, reading the penultimate page. England was in a desperate state and responded with a brutal massacre of Danish settlers in 1002. Over the next decade, this unrest was shown to breed even greater violence. As the Danes embarked on a series of reprisals, culminating in Danish rule of England in 1013, I pressed the page to my face, imagining it was her skin. I traveled with my work. I went to Paris, Boston, Rome, Sao Paulo, Berlin, Madrid, Tokyo. I wanted to fill my mind with human faces in order to forget Isabel's, but it had the opposite effect. By studying the entire human species, I felt more towards her specifically. By thinking of the cloud, I thirsted for the raindrop, so I stopped my travels and returned to Stanford and tried a different tactic. I tried to lose myself in nature. The highlight of my day became the evening when I was getting my car and drive out of town. Often I would head to the Santa Cruz Mountains. There was a place there called the Big Basin Redwood State Park. I would park my car and walk around, gazing in wonder at the giant trees, spotting jays and woodpeckers, chipmunks and raccoons, occasionally a black-tailed deer. Sometimes if I was early enough, I would walk down the steep path near Berry Creek Falls, listening to the rush of water which would often be joined by the low croak of tree frogs. At other times I would drive along Highway 1 and go to the beach to watch the sunset. Sunsets were beautiful here. I became quite hypnotized by them. In the past they had meant nothing to me. After all, a sunset was nothing really but the slowing down of light. At sunset, light has more to get through and is scattered by cloud droplets and air particles. But since becoming human, I was just transfixed by the colors: red, orange, pink. Sometimes there would be haunting traces of violet too. I would sit on the beach as waves crashed and retreated over the sparkling sand like lost dreams, all those oblivious molecules joining together, creating something of improbable wonder. Often such sights were blurred by tears. I felt the beautiful melancholy of being human captured perfectly in the setting of a sun, because, as with a sunset, to be human was to be in between things, a day bursting with desperate color as it headed irreversibly towards night. One night I stayed sitting on the beach as dusk fell. A 40-something woman walked along barefooted with a spaniel and her teenage son. Even though this woman looked quite different from Isabel, and though the son was blonde, the sight caused my stomach to flip and my sinuses to loosen. I realized that 6,000 miles could be an infinitely long distance. I am such a human, I told my espadrilles. I meant it. Not only had I lost the gifts, emotionally I was as weak as any of them. I thought of Isabel sitting and reading about Alfred the Great, or Carolingian Europe, or the ancient library of Alexandria. This was, I realized, a beautiful planet. Maybe it was the most beautiful of all. But beauty creates its own troubles. You look at a waterfall or an ocean or a sunset, and you find yourself wanting to share it with someone. Beauty, be not caused, said Emily Dickinson. It is. In one way she was wrong. A scattering of light over a long distance creates a sunset. The crushing of ocean waves on a beach is created by tides, which are themselves the result of gravitational forces exerted by the sun and the moon and the rotation of the earth. Those are causes. The mystery lies in how those things become beautiful, and they wouldn't have been beautiful once, at least not to my eyes. To experience beauty on earth you needed to experience pain and to know mortality. That is why so much that is beautiful on this planet has to do with time passing and the earth turning, which might also explain why to look at such natural beauty was to also feel sadness and a craving for a life unlived. It was this particular kind of sadness that I felt that evening. It came with its own gravitational pull tugging me eastwards towards England. I told myself I just wanted to see them again one last time. I just wanted to catch sight of them from a distance, to see with my own eyes that they were safe. And by pure coincidence about 2 weeks later I was invited to Cambridge to take part in a series of lectures debating a relationship between mathematics and technology. My head of department, a resilient and jolly fellow called Christos, told me he thought I should go. Yes, Christos, I said, as we stood on a corridor floor made of polished pine wood, I think I might. When galaxies collide, I stayed in student accommodation in Corpus Christi of all places, and tried to keep a low profile. I'd grown a beard now, was tanned and had put on a bit of weight, so people tended not to recognize me. I did my lecture. To quite a few years I told my fellow academics that I thought mathematics was an incredibly dangerous territory and that humans had explored it as fully as they could. To advance further, I told them would be to head into a no-man's land full of unknown perils. Seeing the audience was a pretty red-haired woman who I recognized instantly as Maggie. She came up to me afterwards and asked if I'd like to go to the Hat and Feathers. I said no, and she seemed to know I meant it, and after posing a jovial question about my beard she left the hall. After that I went for a walk, naturally gravitating towards Isabel's college. I didn't go too far before I saw her. She was walking on the other side of the street, and she didn't see me. It was strange. The significance of that moment for me and the insignificance of it for her. But then I reminded myself that when galaxies collide, they pass right through. I could hardly breathe watching her and didn't even notice it was beginning to rain. I was just mesmerized by her. All 11 trillion cells of her. Another strange thing was how absence had intensified my feelings for her. How I craved the sweet, everyday reality of just being with her, of having a mundane conversation about how our days had been, the gentle but unbattered comfort of coexistence. I couldn't. Think of a better purpose for the universe than for her to be in it. She pulled open her umbrella as if she were just any woman pulling open an umbrella, and she kept on walking, stopping, only to give some money to a homeless man with a long coat and a bad leg. It was Winston Churchill. One can't love and do nothing. Graham Greene. The end of the affair. Knowing I couldn't follow Isabel, but feeling a need to connect with someone, I followed Winston Churchill instead. I followed slowly, ignoring the rain, feeling happy I had seen Isabel, and that she was alive and safe and as quietly beautiful as she had always been, even when I had been too blind to appreciate this. Winston Churchill was heading for the park. It was the same park where Gulliver walked, Newton, but I knew it was too early in the afternoon for me to bump into them, so I kept following. He walked slowly, pulling his leg along as if it were 3 times as heavy as the rest of him. Eventually he reached a bench. It was painted green, this bench, but the paint was flaking off to reveal the wood underneath. I sat down on it, too. We sat in rain-soaked silence for a while. He offered me a swig of his cider. I told him I was okay. I think he recognized me, but I wasn't sure. I had everything once, he said. Everything. A house, a car, a job, a woman, a kid. Oh, how did you lose them? My 2 churches, the betting shop and the off-license, and has been downhill all the way, and now I'm here with nothing, but I am myself with nothing, an honest bloody nothing. Well, I know how you feel. Winston Churchill looked doubtful. Yeah, right you are, fella. I gave up eternal life. Ah, so you were religious? Something like that. And now you're down here, sinning like the rest of us. Yeah? Well. Just don't try and touch my leg again and we'll get on fine, I smiled. He did recognize me. I won't. I promise. So, what made you give up on eternity, if you don't mind me asking? I don't know. I'm still working it out. Good luck with that, fella. Good luck with that, thanks. He scratched his cheek and gave a nervous whistle. Hey, you haven't got any money on you, have you? I pulled a 10-pound note out of my pocket. You're a star, fella. Well, maybe we all are, I said, looking skyward. And that was the end of our conversation. He had run out of cider and had no more reason to stay. So he stood up and walked away, wincing, in pain from his damaged leg as a breeze tilted flowers towards him. It was strange. Why did I feel this lack inside me, this need to belong? The rain stopped, the sky was clear now. I stayed where I was, on a bench covered with slow evaporating raindrops. I knew it was getting later and knew I should probably be heading back to Corpus Christi, but I didn't have the incentive to move. What was I doing here? What was my function now, in the universe? I considered, and felt a strange sensation, a kind of sliding into focus. I realized, though I was on Earth, I'd been living this past year, as I had always lived. I was just thinking I could carry on moving forward, but I was not me anymore. I was a human, give or take. And humans are about change. That is how they survive, by doing and undoing and doing again. I had done some things I couldn't undo, but there were others I could amend. I had become a human by betraying rationality and obeying feeling. To stay me, I knew there would come a point when I would have to do the same again. Time passed. Squinting, I looked again to the sky. The Earth's sun can look very much alone, yet it has relatives all across this galaxy, stars that were born in the exact same place, but which were now very far away from each other, lighting very different worlds. I was like a sun. I was a long way from where I started, and I have changed. Once I thought I could pass through time like a neutrino passes through matter, effortlessly and without stopping to think, because time would never run out. As I sat there on that bench, a dog came up to me. Its nose pressed into my leg. Hello, I whispered, pretending not to know this particular English Springer Spaniel. But his pleading eyes stayed on me even as he angled his nose towards his hip. His arthritis had come back. He was in pain. I stroked him and held my hand in place instinctively, but of course I couldn't heal him this time. Then a voice behind me. Dogs are better than human beings, because they know but don't tell. I turned, a tall boy with dark hair and pale skin, and a tentative nervous smile. Gulliver. He kept his eyes on Newton. You were right about Emily Dickinson. Sorry? Part of your advice. I read her. Oh. Oh yes, she was a very good poet. He moved around the bench, sat down next to me. I noticed he was older. Not only was he quoting poetry, but his skull had somehow become more man-shaped. There was a slight trace of dark beneath the skin on his jaw. His t-shirt said, "The Lost." He had finally joined the band. If I can stop one heart from breaking, that poet said, I shall not live in vain. How are you? Asked. As if you were a casual acquaintance, I often bumped into. I haven't tried to kill myself if that's what you mean. And how is she? Asked. Your mother. Newton came over with a stick, dropped it for me to throw, which I did. She misses you. Me? Or your dad? You? You're the one who looked after us. I don't have any powers to look after you now. If you chose to jump off a roof, then you'd probably die. I don't jump off roofs anymore. Good, I said. That's progress. There was a long silence. I think she wants you to come back. Does she say that? No. But I think she does. The words were rain in a desert. After a while, I said in a quiet and neutral tone, I don't know if that would be wise. It's easy to misunderstand your mother, and even if you haven't got it wrong, there could be all kinds of difficulties. I mean, what would she even call me? I don't have a name. It would be wrong for her to call me Andrew. I paused. Do you think she really misses me? He shrugged. Yeah, I think so. What about you? I miss you too. Sentimentality is another human flaw. A distortion. Another twisted byproduct of love, serving no rational purpose. And yet there was a force behind it as authentic as any other. I miss you too, I said. I miss both of you. It was evening. The clouds were orange, pink, and purple. Was this what I had wanted? Was this what I had wanted? Was this why I had come back to Cambridge? We talked. The light faded. Gulliver attached the lead to Newton's collar. The dog's eyes spoke sad warmth. You know where we live, said Gulliver. I nodded. Yes, I do. I watched him leave. The joke of the universe. A noble human with thousands of days to live. It made no logical sense that I had developed into someone who wanted those days to be as happy and secure for him as they could possibly be. But if you came to Earth looking for a logical sense, you were missing the point. You were missing lots of things. I sat back and absorbed the sky and tried not to understand anything at all. I sat there until it was night. Until distant suns and planets shone above me, like a giant advert for better living. On other, more enlightened planets, there was the peace and calm and logic that so often came with advanced intelligence. I wanted none of it. I realized. What I wanted was that most exotic of all things. I had no idea if that was possible. It probably wasn't. But I needed to find out. I wanted to live with people I could care for and who would care for me. I wanted family. I wanted happiness, not tomorrow or yesterday, but now. What I wanted, in fact, was to go home, so I stood up. It was only a short walk away. Home is where I want to be, but I guess I'm already there. I come home. She lifted up her wings. Guess that this must be the place. Talking heads, this must be the place, and thanks for your like, share and subscribe Human Stories radio channel.